Okay, we would like to call here the last but not least speaker. That's Dr. Lada Roslytska. She is the director of strategic communication at TV platform Ukraine Today, which I understand is like rival of Russia Today. And she's the international security analyst and human rights advocate.
I'm always really bad with these technical things. З вашим дозволом я буду розмовляти англійською мовою, бо в мене є технічний лексикон, котрий мені просто легше вживати англійською, і я думаю, що молодь України і так повинна вже бути хоча трохи мовою.
Maybe you start,
Okay, my presentation, the purpose of my presentation today is twofold, but most importantly it is to present a methodology, which is probably the last thing people want to hear after 2 days of conferencing, of how we can actually analyze the effects of Russian propaganda, and particularly as they affect the national security of a given state, albeit Ukraine, or in the international alliance such as NATO, or global peace and security. I will throw a formula out at you. It looks scary, but it's actually not so scary. And how do I use this now with the PDF?
Just the other way.
So Orwell keeps getting quoted since the war broke out in Ukraine. And what information, strategic communications, propaganda, political communications are all designed to do is to change the way you think and the way that you perceive one another in the world that you belong to. So this is a great quote, that it's all about power. And I'm going to show to you today how the most important elements of national security and state power is the way that you think and perceive one another and the territory upon which you live. So strategic political communication is unfortunately a course that isn't really readily available in Ukraine. And I would like to commend the University of Ivano-Franko, National University here, the Department of Linguistics, which is really giving a push to developing and has developed the first comprehensive program in this direction. Strategic political communication, basically you have to have a message that is communicated, and you have to have a target audience. You have to have a receiver who is willing and able and in a position to accept that message and understand that message, and also understand and be convinced by those messages that their behavior should be changed in one way or another. I told you more about it.
I think you're just writing it upside down. That's why it's
Okay.
the other way.
So propaganda. Propaganda is actually a Latin word which means to promote something, and it hasn't always been a bad thing. In fact, it's only until
Just forward.
It's only until 1982 that the Vatican changed the institution, and as a Ukrainian Catholic university, I would hope that you would know that the term propaganda started in the Vatican in 1622 in a department that was developed in order to promote Catholicism throughout the world. In 1982, Pope John Paul II changed the name of this institution, largely due to the stigma that the term propaganda received from the activity of Joseph Goebbels during World War II. Dangers of propaganda, as we see happening now, is that something can be labeled as propaganda in order to limit the freedom of expression and the freedom of speech, access to information. It's particularly dangerous when it is in the hands of governments at this point, because governments still have some sort of social contract and state responsibility. Although we do see in this globalizing world that corporations are using propaganda and psychological programming more and more in order to create better consumers. Recently, April 22nd to be exact, the OSCE representative on communication and media freedoms actually called upon the Ukrainian government to limit, actually criticize the Ukrainian decision to limit Russian films, particularly Russian films that are being shown in Ukraine, which promote the strength of Russian institutions, particularly security services, police services. And she was very disturbed about this, saying that we should use the court system to fight such abuses rather than create laws that make across-the-board bans. That's easy for her to say, considering the fact that at least now she lives in a country with a little bit more rule of law than Ukraine has probably ever seen. So the question comes up, where is that limit? Where is that interface, that fine line between the freedom of speech and expression, which we so badly and value in democratic countries, and incitement to hate and conflict, which is actually a war crime and can be brought in front of the court, even the ICC. One of this main issue is a conflicting factor for people in the Baltic states, people in Ukraine, Georgia, even to an extent with Azerbaijan and Armenia, that try to explain to the democratic West, to the press in the democratic West, that certain freedoms are not, they can't be honored in these territories yet, because there is a fifth column, and a very strong fifth column that is led, and it is an inheritance of it's the post-Soviet political criminal nexus, which is largely Kremlin-centered. I will not bother you with the legal articles, but it is important to stipulate that since World War II, most legal cases that have been brought up in front of international courts and national courts focus actually on the right. So the right to have an opinion without interference, the right to express your freedoms and even your sexual habits publicly. Much less information. I have a PDF up here and a different format here. So this is Article 19 of the ICPBR, which is, there are a couple of other international treaties that cover these laws, but I stick with one because just to give you, I think that these two articles give you a good overview, the best ones. And most national laws, including Ukrainian law, allows this and also prohibits the abuse. Article 20 of the ICPBR actually says that propaganda for war shall be prohibited, as it is, by international conventions and national laws, but it is also advocating national, racial, or religious hatred that constitutes incitement to discrimination, hostility, or violence shall be prohibited by law. Now here I'm going to hit you with a formula to show you how the way that you think actually directly impacts the strength of your country and its national security. It's a very easy mathematical formula. The PP is the power potential of a state. The first set, CME, we're not paying attention to. These are tangible components, things that you can touch and measure. C is the critical mass, which includes the territory, the actual land of your country, and the people on it. M is your military capacity, what you have as far as military is concerned, and E is your economic capacity. Our interest is not on the first set. It's on the second set, which includes intangible. This is the national strategy, so the capacity to have a national strategy, and the level of will within the nation, within the people living on that territory, to actually give effect to that strategy. This is a formula that was developed by CIA advisor in 1979, Ray Klein, and it is still effective and used in international relations studies and security studies all over the world. Importantly, you can see from this formula, the top, this 100 plus 200 plus 200 times 0.5 equals 500, that is the official formula. How do you say, the values that we give to the different components of state power. The second line doesn't exist. This I just used to give you an example. If you multiply anything by 1, it remains the number that you started with. So if you have perfect people in a perfect territory, all the military capacity you can possibly have and economic capacity, and if you have full capacity to have national strategy and will, that is the only time that you're actually able to realize the power potential of your country. Anything multiplied by anything less than 1 is going to have a direct reduction in the power potential of your tangible worth. As you can see here on the third line. Painstakingly, there's a Copenhagen School of Security Studies analyzed, normally people think about national security as particularly pertaining or limited to the military sector. But national security is actually divided particularly by the Copenhagen School, into military, environmental, economic, societal, and political. Without boring you into 300 pages of article writing, basically this is the format. The combination of societal and political security actually equal the national strategy and the national will. And these are the components that effective strategic communication policies have to target in order to either create separatism, cause fear and animosity amongst peoples, or do the opposite, unite, create stronger states, create stronger organizations. The soft power aggression that we've seen in Ukraine, particularly, I mean, we have different levels of analysis. Let's stick with Ukraine for the time being. I used this formula first to analyze how the Russian Black Sea Fleet was used to take Crimea away in 2011. This little slide is a fun, easy way to show you, if you understand the previous categories, these ones. It's easy for you to create a methodology if you're analyzing certain, like Stop Fake has 100 of those things a day, or Russia Lies. If you're able to place each of those into one main category, because they often interact with one another. But the 3 main components are the level of national integration, which is broken down into using cultural aspects such as ethnicity, language, religion, territorial, the feeling that this is my country, or I belong here and I belong to live with the people, and also targeting collective memory. As we see now in Transnistria or in Donbass, there's a huge push to support that Soviets' great history where nothing was wrong. The strength of national leadership the propaganda targets directly government institutions and creates doubt inside of the nation that these institutions are actually functioning in their interests or doing anything good and should be obeyed. Is this one? And ideology, common interest. So what I did, leading up to the war, there was this man, maybe some of you still remember him, his name was Dmytro Tabachnik. Dmytro Tabachnik was the Minister of Education in Ukraine, who, in my humble opinion, is probably one of the first people who should be placed behind bars by the Ukrainian society today. What I've done was I took about 200 cases of his actions And I analyzed how his actions targeted in a negative way Ukraine's national security, soft power security. I'll give you a couple of examples, and so then I just put them in. How effective it is, how many times did it happen, which territory did it actually target, where did it take place? And I'll give you two examples. I'm sure that some of you may know a lot more, but the two examples I will use because they target children, and they're very smart ways to modify the way that people think. While minister, Tabachnik signed off on a kindergarten first grade school book that was only given in Donbass, the entire Luhansk and Donetsk territories. And in that school book, the Westerners, particularly Galicians, were portrayed as drunks, lazy people. People in Donbass are the hard-working miners that support Ukraine, they carry Ukraine on the back. And using children's books in this way is clever because the kid has to read it, the teacher has to read it, and then you probably target the grandmother and the parent and the babysitter, because everybody has to take care of these children. Coming and having meetings in Donbass, both Luhansk and Donetsk, denying that Ukraine ever existed, and saying that Ukraine does not have its own educational policy, and that the Russian education policy is Ukrainian education policy. These are certain examples of very easy to use scheme where you just say, did he use language, did he use religion, and then putting it in on a timeline. On an international level of analysis, it's also handy to put it in territorially, like where is that used. Ibis, in the elevator, and there's this little sign that says, those do not disturb signs that you hang on the door. This sign had the not scratched up, and it said, please stop the abuse of children, so pedophilia. And I was shocked to be in an elevator in my hotel, but this is a way that propaganda is actually being used to make our environment safer, and this is an example. Another example I don't really like, but propaganda again. But this is a communication used in order to make you think twice about lighting a cigarette, because it's bad. But once again, there's that fine line, and we should have debate. We shouldn't start to hate each other and turn to violence as we see happening all around the world as a result of fear-mongering and psychological operations that target your hearts and minds. The fine line is quite thin. This is a poster, an American one, that was made during the Second World War. And basically it promotes family, it promotes having your own garden, it promotes everything, but the reason that they're going to have a lot to eat that winter is because they have to make their own food, because the money is going to the front lines for the government to support the war. Another fine line, this one is a little bit nicer. I like this one. And the question is, that's the question, should we use it now? Which element does it promote? Fear? Does it promote hate? Does it promote nationalism? So these are just like old-time examples. Again, Joseph Goebbels is the one who was the master. His operations in the long run won during the World War II. And his comment about the lie. If you tell a lie big enough to keep repeating it, people will eventually come to believe it. The lie can be maintained only for such time as the state can shield the people from the political, economic, and/or military consequences of the lie. It thus becomes vitally important for the state to use all of its powers to repress dissent, for the truth is the mortal enemy of the lie. And thus, by extension, the truth is the greatest enemy of the state. These are examples of some of the propaganda that was used in Ukraine under Goebbels, while Goebbels was in power. and for those who can't understand it, it's a Ukrainian woman looking into the field with two graves in the back, and it's on the bottom, it's written, the German soldier died for Ukraine. These ones, these two I really like, particularly the one on the right, which is again fear-mongering, and on the one hand it wants to unite the Germans with the Ukrainians against the common enemy, but yet it uses religion and particularly religion and culture here as an element of creating hate and distrust towards the enemy. And maybe you can't see on the one on the right side the yoke that is put on the heads of the two Slavic men, Ukrainian, that has the Star of David on the lock. So it's a very tiny little symbol and element, but it's using that Jewish fear of Jews in order to support basically Nazi policies in Ukraine. I like this one, having lived in Amsterdam for so many years. So mushrooms are poisonous. And here again we see the Star of David, and I'm sure that we're all very familiar with the meeting that Putin had with lead rabbis in 2014. For those of you who are not familiar with that meeting, at that moment, Putin quite courageously noted that Google's had been an extremely talented man. And some brief examples of how Google's talent is now being modeled and used by Putin and co. the Kremlin. This is an article actually that showed up in photo on an American website by Chris Anaristo, who is a staunch anti-American, anti-war. He's American, I think he's teaching in Orlando. And but he's clearly a Russian troll, or a Russian, an American freedom fighter on the Kremlin's payroll. And somebody earlier yesterday was saying that one of the great faults that we have in our democratic countries is that our media does not cover enough information about the underdog. And that's why that 1% action is so high, because that feeling of our voice isn't being heard actually deserves a listening ear. And Russia tapped in on that much more than we have, and that's a mistake. This is again just creating international fear. We had, I believe Christina used a similar slide. This one is my favorite. One of my favorites. But basically this was shown on the internet that this is like a wild Ukrainian in triumph eating a burned arm of poor rebels in the Donbass area. But in fact, this wasn't a Ukrainian at all. It was a Russian guard, and using special effects. But the level of fear-mongering that is used, I feel very sorry for the Russian population, because they are first and foremost the ones who are targeted in order to believe this, and their freedom and political rights are dwindling much sooner than I see Ukrainian or Baltic states' rights ever disappearing. This one I threw in, it's an old one, but to give you an example, I do a little bit of fundraising, and before I moved to Ukraine, I was between Washington and Ottawa. And in Ottawa, we developed a fundraiser, and maybe Stop Fake would like to think about using such things in the future for fundraising. We had invited MPs, senators, members of the elite, academia, to a very nice sort of brewery. And we had a Sunday afternoon of beer drinking and playing multiple choice games. And what we did in this multiple choice game was really confront them, like, this is, like, here you have a picture, which is real, or what is this? And I use this when I travel and all over Europe or in the United States and Canada, as in your face. We had a table with two staunch supporters, MPs, conservative, it was still the conservative government of Ukraine. And there were only 16 questions because this game can drag on. And at the end, I was surprised that neither of those MPs had won. It was the person who won the top 3 prizes, which were chocolates from Lviv with Putin, with the Napoleon hat. Maybe you've seen those little models of chocolate. And the MPs, one of the MPs, I won't name him, he took his questionnaire sheet and ripped it up and put it in a little plate. And I was kind of curious, so I took that paper, and in front of him I put it together, and that guy only got 2 out of 16 questions right. And this is an MP who supports Ukraine's freedom and democracy in the post-Soviet era. That was really indicative to me that there's a lot of work to be done. I used to believe this statement wholeheartedly, Voltaire. I may disagree with what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it. I'm not so sure about the validity of Voltaire's statement when there is a time of war. And in a time of war, where we live in a society where it's easier to call it an anti-terrorist operation, where we call military units rebels or separatists, we have first and foremost an obligation towards ourselves and our dignity to call black, black, white, white, and there is truth. I know that we can talk about constructivism and deconstructivist theory, but maybe we should consider why would certain elements in society want to impose a belief on society that there is no black or white and everything is gray. Because my hunch is it leads to impunity and a lot of war and death and probably consumerism. On that note, I do believe in the freedom of speech, but what really grinds my gears is when people confuse freedom of speech with consequence-free speech. On that note, I would like to thank you for your attention.
Thank you. I will start with the question and then we proceed. Back in 2011, as you've shown us part of it, in your research you basically shown how Russia spurred the separatism in eastern Ukraine, yeah? And if anyone in Ukraine, paid attention, this could be avoided. What could have been done to do that, to your professional opinion?
To clarify, I predicted how Crimea would be taken away from Ukraine. Donbass was going to be my case study, but it
next one, yeah.
Particularly Donbass was some of the key grassroots organizations that started separatism by Russia were actually environmental organizations that were fighting against the development of shale gas. Probably the most shocking thing in 2000, I think it was 8, Boris Tarasuk was a Minister of Foreign Affairs, and Yanukovych had just become Prime Minister, and I had meetings in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. At that time, the pressure against the democratic government was so high that they had shut off the heating, because Yanukovych was under control of the ministry that heats the state buildings. And this was winter. I came in my fur coat to meet with a still acting ambassador, Viktor Semenov, who was the mayor of Sevastopol in 1996, who actually was the first one to sign Sevastopol away to the Russian Federation under Kuchma. Very few people know this, but this man is missing a leg and a finger, and he's very big. He's a former basketball player, who actually told me a lot. And what could have been done in that time when we still had Boris Tarasuk running around the world and really promoting democracy and ringing bells? First and foremost, Ukrainian media could have actually been more of an instrument. When I was writing this 300-page book, many people in academia, even in Harvard, would say that I'm a conspiracy theorist. And it was only until 2014 where finally I was legitimate again as an academic, although it was in-depth study. So talking about not being, there's a great poster from that censorship thing upstairs where it says, if you're afraid to speak the truth, scream it. And if more people scream it, then I really believe that you can only kill so many people.
Questions? Питання, будь ласка.
Там мікрофон коло вас є.
Well, thank you so much for great presentation, and I have not that much question, but just a comment to your photo with soldier eating flesh. So basically, we had the whole story about it because our Italian editor made a story that very particular photo was used at the very beginning of the Crimean annexation and Donbass in Italian parliament by the Italian senator, who basically said that instead of sanctioning Russia, we should sanction Ukrainian army of cannibals basically. And that was absolutely seriously taken, and it went through all Italian media as a major story about Ukraine, that Ukrainian army is involved in acts of cannibalism. Instead, that was a part of the movie behind the scene, kind of movie making behind the scene process. And this is just what it is, you know. So that's just a short comment, how quite an innocent picture that might be considered a joke by many was used for wider political ramifications and decision-making process.
Yeah. And it continues. So this is why the Stop Fake and this Russian lies are great instruments, and I'm really happy to see you expanding it to different languages, and I hope that the world will continue listening to you and financing.
Питання, будь ласка. Ну, гаразд. В такому випадку дуже дякуємо нашому спікеру.